It's looking pretty clear coming out of yesterday's arguments that the conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court is likely to uphold Tennessee's law denying transition care to transgender youth, which would have massive ramifications for the nearly half of US states that have similar laws on the books. And not all of the arguments were bad. There was some empathy demonstrated by a few members of the court, but there were also some bad signs. And I want to run through just a few of those and we'll give you our thoughts. So some of the conservatives, including the moderate conservatives on the court, didn't necessarily want to come out and say, screw y'all transgenders. They instead were like, well, we're not doctors. Should we really get involved? Why don't we just do our Dobbs thing again and just punt it to the states? And so you had things like John Roberts saying the Constitution leaves that question to the people's representatives, scientific questions, questions of medicine, rather than to 9 people, none of whom is a doctor. And I'm sure he feels like that's a very principled position to take. But of course, the fundamental question is of your rights to make decisions about your own health, your own medical treatment, that of your children. It's not fundamentally a debate about the morality of medical procedures. It's about whether you are free to do those things. And he apparently has no position on that. We also have another conservative. This is, as we've noted, accused rapist Brett Kavanaugh, who said the Constitution doesn't take sides on how to resolve the medical and policy debate. The Constitution is neutral on the question. But again, this argument is about whether bans on transgender care is a question of sex discrimination. And the Constitution, and certainly the Supreme Court in its adjudication of the Constitution over the past 100 years, has not been neutral on that. It is supposed to protect people against sex discrimination, among other discriminations. And so it's not looking great. If you haven't really been following the specifics of this law, the SCOTUS discussion, the Tennessee law in question prohibits medical providers from prescribing puberty delaying medication, providing hormone therapy, or performing surgery to treat what the law called purported discomfort or distress from a discordance between the minor's sex and asserted identity. Bearing in mind that all of these treatments are available for other things that kids might need to have treated. But I suppose if you're honest with your doctor and say it's for this particular cause, in that case, almighty government wants to bar you and your family from making those decisions. So we're gonna get into some of the other things that the SCOTUS has said, but Farron, I want your thoughts. How closely were you following this? Do you have maybe a little bit more optimism about what the Supreme Court might do in this case? Well, what's your read?
No, I think you're right that they're probably going to do the Dobbs thing and kick it back to the states. But using their own arguments, they are actually making the case that the government should not be involved. By saying, well, we're not doctors, so we can't make these decisions. The Constitution doesn't say that we. So great. So do nothing. Just say, listen, we can't legislate these particular things. We're not going to legislate medical treatments. You're so close to actually getting to the argument, like you know it. You just can't let your ideology go to the point where you accept it. So their own arguments are making the case that no, we should not have any kind of banning of this for this part, but you can use it for over here. These people did not go to medical school. They have not practiced. They do not know anything about these issues other than what they're seeing on Newsmax and Fox News. That is not an education. That is, of course, indoctrination. So this is an issue that shouldn't be an issue. We're legislating things as per usual on the Republican side that aren't any of your business, that do not affect your life. Yet you're out here trying to tell people, no, I am going to rule your life. I am going to do these things and make these decisions for you, even though it has no impact on me. And that's the part that really drives me crazy, is that this became an issue because conservatives made it an issue. And it's something that should never have been this national spotlight type issue. And now the Supreme Court, I feel, is unfortunately going to destroy it.
Yeah, look, I certainly agree, and we can get into our general thoughts. What this is, and I'm saying this to the conservatives who might be watching this. I hope that you are enjoying this because you need to understand this is all you're getting. This is all you're gonna get from the Republicans is you're gonna sit at home, you're gonna turn on Fox News, and Jesse Waters is gonna be like, yeah, Supreme Court banned the care. And you're gonna be like, yeah, screw those transgenders. And then you're gonna turn off the TV and you're gonna sit there and that's gonna be your life. Are you closer to retirement? Are your economic dreams coming true? Can you afford a house or afford your rent? No, because it has nothing to do with any of that. The mere fact that someone in Michigan, some trans 16-year-old, is gonna have to, have a harder life for a few more years before they can finally get the treatment they want. I'm not saying that's one of the states that has the laws, but just as an example, in practice will have absolutely no effect on your life. And it's very strange that you have been convinced to think otherwise. And you should probably think about that. Spend less time thinking about trans people and spend more time thinking about why Republican pundits apparently got together 3 years ago, had a talk, and decided they're gonna convince you that there's literally nothing in this country more important than the fate of trans people. Bearing in mind that, there's people, I don't wanna get into Matt Walsh or whatever, he went, the first 37 years of his life never once talking about trans people, and now he can't go 5 minutes without talking about anything else? Is it possible there's an ulterior motive to that? But anyway, this is stuff that we have, of course, said before. I will say the liberal justices made good points. I think very reasonable points similar. You made a very good point, Farron. If the Constitution is neutral on those things and yet lower courts are not being neutral, it feels like it's your job as a Supreme Court to step in and to bring the country back to the neutrality it should have. But you also have Amy Coney Barrett seeming to acknowledge that this is a sex discrimination case, saying the burdens of the law fall equally on boys and girls because neither can transition. I mean, she also went on to say, is there any evidence that there has been legal discrimination against transgender individuals? Which, has she been conscious for the past couple of years? Hundreds of laws passed in dozens of states. I feel like if you don't know the answer to that question, perhaps you should not be serving on the Supreme Court. But anyway, in a previous case, and this is the sort of thing that if the Supreme Court were to be consistent would potentially be an issue to the conservatives doing what they seem set to do. This is Bostock versus Clayton County. Justice Gorsuch had previously said it is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual based on sex. So he seemed to indicate that it is inherently sex discrimination. I wonder if he'll be consistent in this case. But also, and I want your thoughts on this, Farron. So there's been this thing on the right where to stop kids from learning history or reading books or whatever, all of a sudden, especially in Florida, right wingers are really interested in parental rights. That's the most important thing. Well, unless you want your kid to have one of these treatments, in which case screw you and your parental rights. And interestingly, the Tennessee Solicitor General said in arguing that this is a violation of parental rights. He says the parental rights question is not before this court, which is technically true, and added that there are times when, quote, the states in their traditional role as regulators have had to intervene to protect children. That's the Republican avatar in this case of anti-trans sentiment. And he's making the case that it is the state's role to protect children. And if that's true in this case, if parents don't want to vaccinate their kids, it is traditionally the role of the state to be a regulator and protect kids. I guess you got to do that. If the parents aren't going to clear their houses of guns that might end up killing the kids, maybe it's the state's role to step in and get those guns out of that house. I mean, I know you like parental rights and everything, conservatives, but your dude is saying sometimes the government knows better than you. And in theory, that does not just apply to the question of transgender rights. There's a whole lot of stuff that you guys want to make decisions on, and apparently the government knows better than you. And so look, I know it's pointless to expect consistency out of them in this case, Farron, but on the question of parental rights, your ability to make medical decisions for yourself. These are people who want to take ivermectin and get prescribed colloidal silver, but now they're being told, no, the government knows better than you what sort of treatments your family should have access to you. There's just so many layers of hypocrisy and inconsistency here. Any other thoughts?
And that has become, the hallmark of everything these Republicans do. It always reeks of hypocrisy all the way from the top to the bottom. And this is no different. And I got to tell you that Solicitor General better hope that in the decision these justices eventually come out with, that they do not go with his arguments. Because if they get the ruling that they want for Tennessee, and they cite part of that reasoning within the decision, then suddenly that can in fact be used to do what you're saying. Start challenging these other things, saying, hey, wait a minute. In this ruling, they made it clear the government does have a role. The states can come in and supersede the parents on these issues when it comes to the protection of a child. So you got to be careful what you say in front of the Supreme Court, because again, if it's used in those decisions, that becomes the standing decision. And then it can be used to do all kinds of things that Republicans, of course, it never popped into their heads, but that's how it comes back to bite you in the end.
I agree that that's how it should work. And I like the sentiment, but also precedent doesn't mean anything anymore. You know full well it doesn't. They do whatever they want, man. The only principle is power. But anyway, if we ever get back to a world where reason matters, consistency matters, I 100% agree with you. And someday, if we get that liberal majority, I would love to see the Tennessee Solicitor General's argument getting like a rousing applause from the conservative justices, so we can cite it to do all manner of things. Thanks for watching our video. Did you know that you can support our show by becoming a subscriber? Just click the subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you get notifications when we're live or when we post new content.